Hi, my name's DonGabor, and I've been a teacher for the Learning Annex for more than 25 years. And I can tell you, it is the #1 most important thing that I've ever done that has helped me in my career as an author, a professional speaker, and consultant. And if you teach a class for the Learning Annex, maybe the same will happen for you too. In this session, I want to talk to you about how to handle typical and tricky question and answer sessions. Now, usually these question and answer sessions happen at the end of your workshop or your class. Now granted, you may get questions during your class presentation, and if they're short answer questions, you can handle them. More typically, classes have this Q&A at the end. You want to leave about 10 minutes or so to answer the questions. Now what can happen is you can say, okay, now we're going to have a Q&A session here now, and the room will be just dead silence. And you'll be thinking, uh-oh, now what? Well, the simple answer to that is this. Ask, who has the first question? Now what that does is, it encourages people to raise his or her hand and start to ask a question. Another little trick that you can use is, when you have a break, and you should think about having breaks with your classes depending on how long they are, the number of breaks, is somebody asks a question during the class or on a break, you said, you know, that's a great question. Would you mind asking that to kick off the Q&A session? And people are always happy to do that. So that's a good way to get the ball rolling. When somebody asks you a question in your class, you must repeat or paraphrase the question. And when I say you must, I mean you must. Otherwise, there's a good chance that the rest of the people in the class won't hear the question. So you can start with a great answer, but if they can't or don't know the answer, they don't know the question, they couldn't hear it, or the person was not paying attention to the person asking the question for any number of reasons, your answer is lost. So always repeat or paraphrase the question. When I say paraphrase, sometimes people will ask a very long and involved question and they're really having a hard time getting to the point. So you say, let me paraphrase that question. Is what you mean, is your question, and then shorten it to 10 words or less. This allows you some thinking time on how to answer the question, and it allows the rest of your class to know what the question is. Keep your answers short and to the point. There's a tendency, particularly if you're very knowledgeable in a particular subject, which of course I know you are, to go on and on and on about a particular topic or a particular question. And the question may merit a more detailed answer. But in a Q&A period, you want to remember, you only have so much time. If you've got 3 or 4 or 5 people wanting to ask questions, you don't want to leave anybody out and leave their question unanswered, or at least unasked. Let's put it that way. So if it's a complicated question, you can say, this is a complicated question. And it could have a more detailed answer. But the short answer is this. And in that way, you answer the question, you also hopefully you satisfy the student's desire for an answer, but you're also saying, look, I understand that this question really involves some additional detail, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that either after the class, or email me, or we can talk by telephone. Or if we do have more time at our Q&A, I can go into more detail. Now, what happens if somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer? Now, some people will say, well, let me come up with an idea, let me see if I can come up with an answer, and they kind of start to ramble around and maybe sort of give out a little bit of information here and a little bit of information there, and they kind of not really answer the question. Big mistake. What it does is it undermines your credibility as a teacher and as an expert in the field. And being a teacher for the Learning Annex, one of the greatest benefits of being a teacher in the Learning Annex is it gives you credibility as an expert at what you do. So if you try to answer a question that you don't know the answer, you're actually doing not only a disservice to the student, but you're doing a disservice to yourself. So the best way to do that, the best way to respond to a question that you don't know the answer to, is simply to say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. But that's something that I can work to find out, and I'll get back to you. or I'll do my best to see if I can come up with an answer for that question and email it to you. Is anybody else interested in that question? I'll do the same. And people will raise their hands if they're interested. Another way to handle that situation is you can ask the students in the class, does anybody here want to try and answer that question? And that gives them an opportunity to show their level of expertise. And you may have students in your class who are knowledgeable of your subject, and they're there for any number of reasons. They may want to see if your information is related to their information and the same. They may want to see if you are somebody who they might collaborate with the information. So there's an opportunity to answer a question that you don't know with the students in your class. For unrelated questions, and this does happen, somebody will ask you a question, it'll be out of left field, you know? I mean, it's just completely off the mark as far as you're concerned. But you can't say, hey, what are you, crazy? What are you asking me that kind of question for? That would not be the way to respond to that. The way to respond to a question that doesn't really pertain to the topic that you are focusing on is to say something like this. You know, that's a great question, but it's outside the scope of this class. So let's save that. If you want to give me a call or an email, maybe we can discuss that afterwards. But for this class, next question, please. And in that way, what you've done is you've handled the questioner in a polite way, but at the same time, you've created the parameters, the boundaries of what your class is really about. See, if you really want to be able to present your class for the Learning Annex, you've got to handle those tricky questions as well as the typical questions. Anticipate the questions that are going to come from your students. Be ready with short answers that are right to the point. If you aren't sure about an answer, say, you know, great question, I don't have a clue. Can somebody in the room answer that? And if they can't, you can say, let me get back to you on it. And then ask the students if there's anything else that they came for the class that you didn't cover. And it's at that point where you find out any particular interest that a student had that you, for one reason or another, didn't address in your class, and you can do that final point. And that's how you handle a Q&A session. That's it for now. I'll see you next time.